I'm Isabella, 28-year-old woman from Tucson, Arizona, a city that most people would easily overlook if they didn't take the time to really look. But this is where I grew up, where I learned that success isn't something handed to you. It's something you have to fight for, earn every single step of the way. My childhood wasn't glamorous. My parents were both teachers, hardworking, dedicated, but never rich. I remember the nights I stayed up late, studying in my small bedroom with an old wooden desk, a second-hand computer that was more outdated than I cared to admit. I never had the things that other kids did, designer clothes, expensive gadgets, but I had something more valuable, a fierce drive to make something of myself. Something no one could take away from me. I'll never forget the lessons they taught me. My parents never sugar-coated things, never made excuses. If you want something, you need to go out there and get it. That's what they taught me. The world doesn't owe you anything, and no one's going to hand you a seat at the table. If you want to succeed, you have to make it happen yourself. I think that's why I ended up where I am today. I started tech solutions right out of college. It wasn't easy, though. In fact, it was downright brutal. The first year was a blur of rejection, cold pizza, ramen noodles, and sleepless nights. I worked from my tiny apartment, staring at a computer screen for hours on end, writing code, tweaking software that I hoped would be the key to everything. I had no investors, no backers, just me and a dream. The road wasn't easy. For months, I felt like I was barely keeping my head above water. Every rejection from potential clients felt like a punch in the gut. Every late night spent working on new features that went unnoticed by the world made me wonder if I was fooling myself. But there was always that little voice inside me, telling me to keep going, that the struggle would be worth it. And over time, things started to change. Slowly, clients began noticing. By the 5th year, I had a solid customer base, a growing team, and Tech Solutions was no longer just a dream. It was a real, thriving business. But something else started to change too. One day, in the midst of a tech conference in Boston, I found myself standing by a coffee table, nervously glancing around the room. I had spent countless hours working on my presentation, tweaking every detail, making sure everything was perfect. Yet, here I was, on the verge of presenting a product to a room full of industry leaders, and my heart was racing. I hadn't expected the event to be anything more than just a professional obligation, another step in the long journey of building my company. Tech Solutions was doing well, but I knew that I needed to expand my network if I was going to take it to the next level. Still, I had no idea that this conference would change my life. That's when he walked in. Daniel. He wasn't tall in the way I imagined a business tycoon might be, but there was something about him that commanded attention. His presence was understated, yet undeniably magnetic. He wasn't like the other investors or tech experts mingling around the room. While they seemed to carry a certain air of arrogance, Daniel had a quiet confidence. He wasn't loud or flashy. Instead, he had a way of making people feel like they were the most important person in the room when he spoke to them. Our first interaction was unexpected. I had just finished my presentation, and as I stepped away from the stage, my mind buzzing with both excitement and self-doubt, I felt someone approach me. It was him. "I was really impressed by your pitch," Daniel said, offering a genuine smile as he extended his hand. His voice was calm and confident, and I could hear the curiosity in his tone. "The problem you're solving with your software. It's not just about logistics, is it? It's about how businesses evolve and adapt. You've got something special here." I was caught off guard by his insight, but more than that, I was struck by the warmth of his presence. For someone who came from a family that controlled vast business empires, he didn't carry the usual sense of entitlement or superiority. He wasn't judging me or my humble beginnings. Instead, he was genuinely curious, interested. And that was something I wasn't used to. We ended up talking for hours, about technology, about the future, and about our own journeys. It was easy, effortless. For the first time in a long while, I found myself sharing my story without fear of being judged. He listened with an intensity that made me feel seen, as if he truly cared about what I had to say. As we talked, I learned more about Daniel. He came from an old money family in New York, one of those families whose wealth was built on generations of power and influence. He had inherited a large portion of his family's wealth and had become a key player in the world of finance. He was used to high-stakes deals and boardrooms filled with billion-dollar contracts, but there was something different about him. Despite his background, he didn't have the same cold, calculating edge I had come to expect from people of his social status. His family was known for their power, but Daniel seemed different, more human, more open. He didn't speak in the same clipped business jargon that everyone else did. He talked about the things he loved: innovation, entrepreneurship, the future of technology. But beneath it all, there was something deeper, a quieter conflict that I couldn't quite put my finger on. Over the next few months, Daniel and I began to spend more and more time together. It started innocently enough, a few business lunches, a shared interest in the technology world. But soon, it turned into something more. Something real. We would go out for coffee or dinner, and it felt like I was seeing him for who he truly was, not just the wealthy, polished persona he projected at business events. We laughed about our struggles, about the challenges of starting a company from scratch. He told me about his family and the pressure of living up to their legacy. I told him about growing up in a modest neighborhood in Tucson, about the nights I stayed up working on my computer, hoping one day it would all pay off. It felt like we were two people on parallel paths, facing different challenges but somehow united by our drive to succeed. We encouraged each other, and soon, I began to feel something I hadn't expected, a sense of belonging. Daniel made me feel like I was more than just a startup founder. He made me feel like I was part of something bigger than myself. And then, just when everything seemed perfect, he did it. He took me to East Hampton to meet his family. I was nervous, excited, and terrified all at once. Meeting your partner's family was always a big deal, but meeting his family, the Walkers, the titans of finance, the old money dynasty, that felt like stepping into a whole new world. Daniel's family estate was located in East Hampton, a place where the streets were lined with luxury cars, and the air smelled like money. I had heard of the area before: gated communities, massive houses tucked away behind tall hedges, estates owned by the wealthiest families in New York. But seeing it in person was something else entirely. As we drove through the streets, I could feel my stomach tightening. The closer we got, the more I could sense that something wasn't right. The opulence around me seemed almost suffocating. It wasn't the kind of wealth that felt warm. It felt cold, calculated, as if everything existed to remind you that you didn't belong. Daniel seemed unfazed, his hand resting casually on the wheel. He was driving a sleek black BMW, and there was an air of confidence about him, one that made me wonder if he'd ever questioned the world he was born into. I, on the other hand, felt small, like a fish out of water. We pulled up to the front of the estate, and I couldn't help but feel like I was walking into a movie scene, except, in this movie, I wasn't the lead character. The mansion stood tall, towering above the manicured lawns. Its columns seemed to stretch into the sky, and the lights from the windows cast a golden glow across the yard, giving the entire place an almost ethereal quality. It was grand. It was magnificent. It was overwhelming. As we entered the grand hall, I was hit by the sheer elegance of the place. The floors gleamed with polished marble, and family portraits from generations past lined the walls, their eyes gazing down with a quiet authority. Everything was pristine, perfect, and yet there was something inherently intimidating about it all. A woman appeared from one of the side rooms. Eleanor, Daniel's mother. She was tall, poised, and dressed in a fitted black dress, the kind that only someone with her wealth and status could pull off. Her jewelry was understated but expensive. Pearls, diamonds, subtle, yet enough to announce her place in the world. She greeted Daniel first, with a practiced kiss on the cheek. "Darling," she said, her voice smooth but cold, her gaze lingering on me. Then her eyes turned to me. I extended my hand, trying to keep my composure, but the moment our hands met, I felt it, the briefest flicker of a power struggle. Her grip was firm, almost too firm, and her eyes seemed to examine me like I was a specimen under a microscope. "So you must be Isabella," she said with a tight smile, her voice dripping with a kind of politeness that didn't quite reach her eyes. Her assessment of me was immediate, and I could feel it. She didn't ask how I was or what I did, not in the way people normally do. Instead, she asked where I was from, my family background, the usual questions that felt more like a test than genuine curiosity. Each word she spoke felt carefully calculated, like she was trying to decide if I was worthy of being in her world. I was prepared for this. I knew her type, people who saw others in terms of status and value, who judged you by your background, your family, your wealth. But still, it stung. I was reminded of how much I didn't belong here. She didn't waste time on small talk. Her questions were pointed, careful, as if she already had her own conclusions drawn. Where did I grow up? What did my parents do? The usual questions, but with an edge to them. Questions that seemed to be more about testing me than genuinely getting to know me. I could feel the scrutiny in her eyes, the way she lingered on my answers, as if every detail about my life would determine whether or not I was worthy of Daniel. The conversation shifted, and soon it wasn't just about me anymore. She began to inquire about tech solutions, about my business. At first, I was proud to talk about my company, the struggles I'd overcome, and the success I'd built. But as I spoke, I realized she wasn't interested in the details or the accomplishments. She was assessing my worth, not just as a woman, but as a potential addition to her family, her kingdom. It was a test. And I wasn't sure if I was passing. Alina's questions grew more intense, more calculated. She wanted to know about my assets, my future plans, and every time I answered, her gaze grew more critical. It wasn't long before I felt like I was being reduced to numbers, figures that could be easily calculated and assigned value. The more she questioned, the more I felt like I was a commodity she was considering, not a person. Then, just when I thought things couldn't get more uncomfortable, she dropped it. The air seemed to thicken, the conversation coming to a halt as she leaned in slightly, her eyes never leaving mine. "So," she began, her voice smooth and calm, "if you truly wish to marry my son, there is something that needs to be done." I felt my heart skip a beat. There was a sharp edge to her words now, something that had been lurking beneath the surface all evening, but it had never been this clear. She wasn't asking for approval or even an opinion. No, she was giving me a directive. "I'm sure you're aware," she continued, her tone almost too casual, "that marrying into the Walker family is not just a union of love. It's a union of status, of tradition, and if you want to be part of that, there's a price." I blinked, unsure if I had heard her correctly. A price? Was she talking about a wedding ring, or maybe some elaborate family gift? But then she laid it out plainly, her words crisp and deliberate. $500,000. A dowry, she said, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. "If you truly wish to marry Daniel and join our family, you'll need to pay that amount to the family trust. Consider it a formal entry fee." I froze, the words hung in the air, echoing around me. $500,000. For what? To prove my worth. To become a part of a world I didn't even know how to belong to. I glanced at Daniel, hoping for some kind of support, some kind of sign that this wasn't happening. But when I looked at him, he wasn't looking at me. He was staring down at his plate, his fingers wrapped tightly around his glass. It was as though the room had disappeared, and there was nothing but her voice, cutting through the silence. "This is the way of the Walkers, Isabella," she continued, her tone now more matter-of-fact, as though this were something I should have already known. "Every woman who marries into this family does so with a price. It's a tradition. And this is the cost of being with Daniel." I could barely breathe. The sting of her words, the complete and utter disregard for my dignity, it was as though she had shattered the illusion of everything I thought I knew about love, about Daniel. I wasn't just an outsider, I was a transaction. I sat there completely still, processing what she had said. $500,000. I wasn't sure what shocked me more, the amount, or the fact that Alina had said it so easily, with no trace of guilt, no hesitation. She wasn't asking for my opinion, she was telling me what was expected of me. This was a price tag on my love. My mind raced. Could this really be happening? Did Daniel know? Did he agree with this? And why hadn't he said a word to defend me? I felt the weight of the situation pressing down on me. Alina had just laid out the rules of this world. If I wanted to marry Daniel, if I wanted to become part of his family, I needed to pay. Pay for my place, my status. I had worked so hard to get where I was, to build something that was my own, something I didn't need to sell myself for. But now, here I was, sitting at a table with a woman who didn't see me as a partner, but as an investment. The room spinning around me as I tried to make sense of it. But what shocked me even more wasn't just the demand, it was Daniel's complete silence. I turned to look at him, hoping, praying for him to say something, anything to defend me. To stand up to his mother. To tell her this wasn't how things worked, that I wasn't a transaction. But he didn't. He sat there, his gaze fixed on his plate, his fingers still wrapped around his wine glass. He didn't even flinch. Not a word, not a gesture, not even a glance in my direction. He wasn't defending me. He wasn't even acknowledging what had just happened. The silence in the room became deafening. The tension that had been building throughout the evening now felt like an oppressive force, pressing down on me from all sides. I could feel my chest tightening, my heart racing. Was this how things were always going to be? Was I always going to be the outsider in his world? The one who didn't fit, who wasn't enough? The more I looked at Daniel, the more the realization sank in. This wasn't just about his family's wealth or their expectations. This was about him. Daniel wasn't the man I thought he was. He wasn't the one who had stood beside me, supported me when the world seemed too heavy to carry. No, the man sitting next to me at that table was someone who could sit in complete silence while his family threw me into the fire. I felt the sting of betrayal deep within me. It wasn't the kind of betrayal that came from a sharp word or an angry argument. It was the betrayal of indifference, of being completely invisible when I needed him the most. The air around me felt thick, suffocating. I wasn't sure how much longer I could sit at that table, pretending that everything was okay. I felt out of place, not just in the room, but in the entire world Daniel had introduced me to. His family wasn't my family. They didn't see me for who I was, they saw me as a potential asset, a way to solidify their status, their legacy. And what hurt the most was that Daniel, the man I had trusted, the man I had fallen for, didn't even seem to care. The more I thought about it, the more I understood. This wasn't just a wealthy family testing me. This was a family that had been using their wealth and influence to control the people around them, including their own son. Daniel had grown up in this world, surrounded by these expectations, and I began to realize that he wasn't just complicit, he was part of it. The silence stretched on. Alina continued her questioning, subtly reinforcing the notion that my worth was tied to the amount of money I could bring into the family. The unspoken rules were clear. If I couldn't meet their demands, I didn't belong. I looked over at Daniel again, hoping for some sign that he would take my side, that he would at least acknowledge the position I was in. But no. His face remained impassive, his eyes fixed on his glass of wine. He didn't even seem to notice the weight of the moment, didn't seem to feel the sting in the air, didn't feel my heartbreak as it settled between us like a chasm. After that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Alina's demand for $500,000 had been shocking, but what unsettled me even more was Daniel's complete silence. His indifference to the situation cut deeper than anything she had said. I needed answers. I couldn't let this go. I had to know if this was just a one-off request, or if there was something more to it. I started by reaching out to people who had worked with Daniel's family over the years, trying to gather information without arousing suspicion. Slowly, bit by bit, the truth began to unfold. It wasn't just a one-time thing, it was a tradition, something the Walkers had done for generations. The dowry was their way of ensuring that anyone entering their family was bound by more than just love. It was a way of securing their legacy, making sure the women who joined were financially tied to them, ensuring loyalty and submission. I found out that one of Daniel's former fiancés, who had refused to pay the dowry, had faced severe consequences. Her family business was blacklisted, her name dragged through the mud. She was forced to end her engagement to Daniel to protect her family from further damage. It was clear to me now. The Walkers used their wealth and status to manipulate and control the women who entered their world. The more I uncovered, the more I realized that Daniel wasn't just a bystander in this. It wasn't that he hadn't known about the dowry, it was that he had grown up with it, accepted it as normal. He was complicit, even if he hadn't fully understood the weight of it. As I pieced everything together, I felt my heart sink. I wasn't just being asked to marry into a wealthy family, I was being asked to buy my place, to surrender my independence, and to submit to a world that I could never be a part of. This wasn't about love, it was about control. And Daniel, he hadn't said a word to defend me, he hadn't even acknowledged how uncomfortable this situation made me. I was invisible to him, and his silence spoke volumes. I had to face the painful truth. I didn't belong in his world. No matter how much I loved him, no matter how much I wanted to make it work, I would never fit into the Walker family. I had fought so hard to build something of my own, and I wasn't about to lose it by stepping into a world that only saw me as an asset. Daniel and I came from two completely different worlds, and I realized that I couldn't keep pretending I was okay with this. I had to make a choice. I wasn't sure if I was ready to walk away, but I knew that I couldn't stay and let my dignity be compromised. I had to confront him. He needed to see what his family was doing, and he needed to realize that I wasn't a woman who could be bought. I couldn't stay in a relationship that valued money and power over everything else. And if Daniel couldn't understand that, then maybe it wasn't just his family that was the problem, it was him. After my unsettling discoveries about the dowry, I felt like I was only scratching the surface. The more I dug into Daniel's family, the more I realized that there was something much darker at play, something that went far beyond just money. The dowry wasn't just a financial demand. It was part of a much larger, more insidious system of control, one that I had no idea I was stepping into. A few days later, I received a call from an old friend, Michael, who worked in finance. We had crossed paths a few times during various tech conferences, and while we didn't speak often, he had always been someone I trusted. His family had been in finance for decades, and he had insight into the industry that few others had. When he called, I didn't expect what he was about to say. "I know about the Walkers," Michael began, his voice lower than usual, as if he was trying to keep our conversation private. "And I know about the dowry request. But that's just the tip of the iceberg." My heart skipped a beat as he continued. "Eleanor Walker, she's not just about the money," Michael said. "She's been controlling her family's empire for years, manipulating every aspect of it, including the marriages of her sons." I felt a wave of confusion rush over me. I wasn't sure I understood what he was implying. "What do you mean?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. "Every time one of her sons gets engaged," he explained, "she makes sure the woman knows what's expected. It's not just the money, Isabella. She uses marriage as a way to control the women who marry into their family. Once they say yes, they have to give up everything, their careers, their ambitions, even their personal goals. It's like a transaction. They give up their lives to become part of the Walker legacy." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I felt nauseous. "So the dowry, it's not just about money," I whispered, barely able to process the weight of what I was hearing. "No, it's never just about the money," Michael replied. "The dowry is a form of leverage. Eleanor knows that money gives her control. Every woman who marries into that family is bound by it. They give up their careers, their independence, their very identity, just to be a part of the Walker world. The money is a price they pay for their submission, and once they do, they're no longer allowed to pursue their own lives. They are, in a sense, trapped." My mind reeled as I let his words sink in. It wasn't just about a family demanding money to secure their legacy. It was about controlling the women who came into their lives. Eleanor wasn't just asking for a dowry, she was building a prison. And the women who entered her world were expected to leave their individuality behind, just to serve her family's needs. The more Michael spoke, the more my world felt like it was crumbling around me. I thought I was simply entering a relationship with someone I loved, but what I was walking into was a trap. A world where I was expected to abandon everything I had worked for, everything I had built on my own, to conform to the oppressive, controlling dynamics of the Walker family. Michael continued, sharing more disturbing details. It's not just the money, Isabella. Every woman who marries a Walker son is expected to give up her career. They stop working, they stop pursuing their own ambitions. The Walkers, Eleanor especially, believe that a woman's place is in the home, supporting her husband, supporting the family. If you try to fight back, try to hold onto any part of your independence, it's not just frowned upon. It's punished. You'll find yourself isolated, your career sabotaged, your name dragged through the mud. It's not just about getting married, it's about surrendering your autonomy. I felt like the ground beneath me had been ripped away. The world I had been building, the independence I had fought for, was at risk of being torn apart by this family. And the man I had fallen in love with, the one I thought could understand me, who had once shown admiration for my ambitions, had been raised in this world. He was a product of it, whether he realized it or not. Daniel wasn't just silent because he didn't want to upset his family. He was silent because he had been taught to accept this as the way things worked. For him, this wasn't abnormal. It was normal. My heart sank deeper as I processed everything. Eleanor's power wasn't just limited to money. It wasn't just about controlling her family's fortune. It was about control over the very lives of the women who entered it. The dowry wasn't a fee. It was a price of submission. A way to trap them in a gilded cage where they would serve the family's legacy at the expense of their own dreams and desires. And Daniel, he was complicit. Maybe he hadn't fully understood the extent of it, but he had grown up in the system, had likely watched women come and go, all of them shaped and molded by his mother's iron grip. He had never questioned it. His silence, his acceptance of his family's ways, was the confirmation I needed. I couldn't keep ignoring the truth. I wasn't just about to marry into a rich family. I was being asked to sacrifice everything I had worked for, to give up my career, my independence, my identity, just to be part of a family that saw me as an asset. And as much as I loved Daniel, I couldn't lose myself in the process. I thought I had uncovered it all. The dowry, Eleanor's control, the manipulation of women who entered the Walker family, it was a nightmare I was barely able to wrap my head around. But what I didn't expect was the next blow. A few days after my conversation with Michael, I received an unexpected call from Alex, a former colleague from the tech industry. He was someone I hadn't spoken to in a while, but we had crossed paths often during our early career days. "Isabella," Alex said, his voice filled with urgency, "I need to tell you something. I don't know if you've heard, but you need to know the truth about Daniel." I felt my pulse quicken. What truth? I had already learned so much, but something in his tone told me this was about to take a turn I wasn't ready for. "Alex, what are you talking about?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. "Daniel," he began slowly, "he's been involved in all of it. The dowries, the control, everything." I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. My stomach twisted in knots. I couldn't breathe. "Daniel, no, this couldn't be true. He wasn't just complicit," Alex continued, his words like daggers. "He wasn't just a bystander, quietly accepting what his mother did. Daniel was part of it. He helped persuade the women who came before you to accept the dowry. He was a key figure in making sure they agreed to it, making sure they gave up their independence to be with him and his family." I couldn't speak. Daniel, the man I had trusted, the one I had fallen in love with, was a part of this. A part of the manipulation, the control, the system that had trapped so many women before me. I felt the walls of my world crumble. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, my heart aching with the pain of betrayal. I didn't want to believe it, Alex admitted. But I've seen it happen before, and I heard things from people close to the family. Daniel played a huge part in getting those women to accept it. He helped convince them that it was just a part of being in the family, that it was normal. And he did it with a smile, with charm, all the while knowing exactly what was at stake for them. The weight of his words hit me like a tidal wave. Daniel was not the man I thought he was. He wasn't just a victim of his family's control. He was a perpetrator. He had played an active role in manipulating the women who had come before me, making them believe that they had no choice but to comply. He had been complicit, fully aware of the consequences, and he had done nothing to stop it. I could feel my heart breaking. The pain was unbearable, like someone had torn the trust I had placed in him to shreds. I had loved him, had believed in him, but now I saw the truth. Daniel wasn't the man I thought I knew. He wasn't the partner I had imagined. He was a part of the very system I had been trying to escape from. The man who had held my hand, who had whispered sweet words to me, who had once seemed so genuine, he was a liar. As Alex spoke, I could feel the truth sinking in. Daniel had known all along. He had known about the dowry, he had known about the manipulation, and he had been a willing participant. He had convinced other women to comply with the family's demands, all the while pretending to be the loving, caring man I thought he was. I felt sick. The betrayal stung worse than anything I had ever experienced. The man I loved, the man I had trusted with my heart, had been nothing but a tool for his mother's control, and I had been naive enough to believe in him. How could he do this? I whispered to myself, barely able to believe the words. How could he be a part of this? I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. How could I have been so blind? How had I missed all the signs that had been right in front of me? The silence during dinner, his willingness to let his family dictate everything. He wasn't just weak, he was complicit. Daniel had been the one person I thought I could trust, the one person who had made me feel like I wasn't alone in this world. But now, I understood. He was just like everyone else in that family. A part of the system that valued control over love, power over people. As I sat in the quiet of my apartment, the phone still pressed to my ear, I felt an overwhelming sense of clarity. I couldn't stay in a relationship built on lies. I couldn't be with a man who had betrayed not only me but every woman who had ever loved him. Daniel wasn't just a product of his family's control. He had embraced it. He had chosen to be part of it, and in doing so, he had betrayed me in the worst way possible. I was done. The love I had for him, the dreams I had of building a life together, they meant nothing now. The truth had shattered everything. I had worked too hard to build myself up, to become independent, to let a man like him destroy that. The lies were so deeply ingrained in Daniel's world that he didn't even see them for what they were. He had allowed his mother to manipulate and control him, and in turn, he had played an active role in hurting the women who had loved him. I couldn't understand how he hadn't seen the damage he was causing. I had trusted him, loved him, and in return, he had betrayed me in ways I couldn't begin to process. I wasn't just heartbroken. I was furious. Furious at Daniel for his silence, for his complicity. Furious at his family for making me feel small, for treating me like an object to be bought and sold. I wasn't going to be a part of that world. Not anymore. The night was quiet, but my thoughts were anything but. I sat in my apartment, staring out at the city lights, feeling the weight of everything that had happened. The betrayal cut so deeply, I didn't know where to start picking up the pieces. But then, a realization hit me like a wave of cold air. I had to walk away. I could never fit into that world. I could never let myself be someone's possession, someone's tool for their family's legacy. I had worked too hard to get where I was. I had spent years building my own success, my own identity, and I wasn't about to throw it all away for a man who couldn't stand up for me. I had to protect myself. I had to stand up for myself. The decision was made, but there was still one thing left I had to do. I had to confront Daniel. I had to hear him say it, Hear him explain how he had been a part of the lies, how he had allowed me to believe in a future that was never real. I called him. My hands were shaking as I dialed his number, but there was a sense of resolve in my chest that I had never felt before. The phone rang, and I could almost hear my heart beating in my ears. When Daniel answered, his voice was low, almost too casual. "Isabella," he said, "I've been trying to get in touch with you. We need to talk." I could hear the hint of worry in his voice, but it didn't matter anymore. I wasn't going to let him talk me into staying in a situation that was toxic for me. "I don't think there's anything left to say," I replied, my voice steady but firm. "I know everything. About the dowry, about the way your family controls everything, about how you've been part of this all along." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could almost feel him trying to find the right words, trying to explain, but I wasn't going to let him. "Not this time. I can't keep pretending like I didn't see it," I continued. "I can't keep pretending that I don't know who you are, or who your family is. I've been living in a lie, and I can't do it anymore. I won't." I took a deep breath, gathering my strength. "I'm done, Daniel. I'm walking away. I need to protect myself." I hung up the phone and sat there for a moment, letting the silence settle around me. The decision I had made wasn't easy, but it was necessary. I was no longer going to let the Walkers define my worth. I wasn't going to let Daniel or his family control me. I wasn't going to allow myself to be part of a world that treated people like pawns. I stood up from my chair, pacing around the room, feeling a strange sense of liberation. I was scared. The future was uncertain, and leaving Daniel, leaving everything I had hoped for, was terrifying. But in that fear, there was also a clarity that I couldn't ignore. I was enough. I had always been enough. And I wasn't going to let anyone take that from me. I walked over to my desk, grabbed my phone, and started drafting an email to my team. It was time to focus on what truly mattered: my work, my company, my goals. It was time to reclaim my independence and rebuild my future. I wasn't sure what the future would hold, but for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was finally taking control of my own destiny. The decision to walk away from Daniel was just the beginning. As painful as it was to end our personal relationship, I knew that there was something even more important at stake: my integrity. The Walkers weren't just a family I had fallen in love with. They were a toxic influence that had been manipulating me from the start. And now that I saw them for who they truly were, I had to act accordingly. The thought of cutting ties with the Walkers' business was difficult. My company, Tech Solutions, had been working with Walker Industries for years, and their contract represented a significant portion of our revenue. It wasn't a partnership I could afford to lose easily. But as I sat in my office, reviewing the facts, I realized that continuing to work with them wasn't just a financial risk, it was a moral one. I couldn't keep supporting a company that thrived on manipulation and control. I stood up from my desk, my mind racing. My hands trembled as I dialed the number for Walker Industries' procurement department. I knew the decision I was about to make would have consequences, but I couldn't continue to turn a blind eye. "Hello, this is Isabella from Tech Solutions," I began, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm calling to inform you that we are terminating our contract with Walker Industries, effective immediately." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Isabella," the voice replied, a mix of confusion and surprise in their tone. "This is unexpected. Is everything all right? Your company has been an essential partner for us. We've been in business together for years." "I understand," I replied, my voice firm. "But after much consideration, I can no longer continue to support a company that represents the values I no longer believe in. The Walkers, they're not just clients. I now understand the kind of control and manipulation they've used, and I will not be a part of it anymore." I paused, feeling the weight of the words settle heavily in the air. "Please consider this notice of termination. We will not be renewing our partnership moving forward." I hung up the phone with a finality that felt both empowering and terrifying. The consequences of this decision would be significant. Walker Industries had been a major source of income for Tech Solutions, and without their business, we would be facing some difficult months ahead. I was fully aware that this would affect our cash flow, that it would put a strain on our resources, and it would make things harder for everyone involved. In the days that followed, I felt a heavy sense of loss. Losing Walker Industries as a client was more than just a business decision, it was a personal one. It wasn't easy. There was a financial toll that came with it. I had to sit down with my CFO, Rachel, and go over the numbers. We discussed the next steps carefully, weighing the immediate challenges with the long-term vision for Tech Solutions. Isabella, Rachel said, looking at the financial projections on her screen, the loss of Walker Industries will hit us hard. Our short-term revenue will take a significant dip, and we'll need to tighten expenses. But we have to ask ourselves, do we want to continue down a path where we compromise our values? Her question hung in the air, heavy with meaning. What good was success if it meant sacrificing everything I had fought for? I had always believed in creating something real, something that was built on integrity, and I wasn't about to let money or corporate deals derail that. I know it will be hard, I said quietly, but it's the right decision. We can rebuild, we'll find other clients, other ways to grow. I'm not going to continue doing business with a company that operates like this. We'll survive this. I'll make sure of it. I didn't know how long it would take to recover from this decision. I didn't know if we'd face layoffs, cutbacks, or if we'd even be able to make it through the financial strain. But one thing I was certain of was this. I could never go back to the world that Daniel and his family represented. As difficult as it was, I had to choose my integrity over profit. And even though I felt the weight of the sacrifice, I knew that this was the only way I could build a future that aligned with my values. Over the following weeks, my team rallied together. We worked harder, put in extra hours, and refocused our efforts on acquiring new clients. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. And as the months passed, I began to see the fruits of that labor. New partnerships were formed, our client base began to diversify, and our revenue slowly stabilized. We weren't out of the woods yet, but for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace. Tech Solutions was no longer dependent on a corrupt system. We were standing on our own, and that gave me the confidence I needed to keep pushing forward. I had ended the business relationship with his family, but there was still one more thing I needed to do, one final confrontation that would seal the deal, once and for all. Eleanor. I had to face her. I had to do this in person. Not just to sever the final thread that connected me to the Walker family, but to show her, once and for all, that I would not be manipulated or controlled. I called her office and scheduled a meeting. The tone of my voice was calm, almost matter-of-fact, but there was a sense of resolve behind it that I knew she would hear. When the day came, I wasn't nervous. I was ready. I had spent too long letting other people's expectations dictate my life, and I wasn't going to do that anymore. I had built something on my own, and I wasn't about to let Eleanor Walker or anyone else take that from me. As she walked into my office, I couldn't help but notice the way she carried herself. Eleanor had an air of authority about her that was impossible to ignore. She walked in with that same controlled elegance, her eyes scanning the room, as if measuring my worth in the span of a glance. But today, I wouldn't shrink. I wasn't intimidated anymore. She took a seat across from me, her eyes sharp as she studied me. "Isabella," she said, her voice smooth and almost too pleasant. "I must admit, I wasn't expecting this meeting. Your call was unexpected." I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I had nothing left to prove to her. "I'm sure it was," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "But it's long overdue. I wanted to meet with you in person, to make it clear that our business relationship is over." She raised an eyebrow, the faintest trace of a smile curling at the corners of her lips. "I see," she said slowly, the words dripping with condescension. "You think you can walk away from the Walkers and expect no consequences." I didn't flinch. "I'm done," I said simply. "Not just with the business relationship, but with everything. I'm done with the manipulation. I'm done with the lies. I won't be part of your world anymore, Eleanor. She leaned forward slightly, her gaze sharpening. You're making a huge mistake, Isabella, she warned, her voice low, the threat clear. You think you can just walk away from everything we've built for you. From Daniel, from this company, you'll regret this decision. Your career, your future, it'll all come crashing down. You can't afford to stand against us. I looked her square in the eye, not flinching. I don't need your approval. I don't need your family's money or connections. I have built my own success, and I will continue to do so. I will not be your pawn, Eleanor, not in business and not in life. You may control everyone around you, but you will not control me. Her eyes narrowed, and for the first time I saw a flicker of something, frustration, maybe pass over her face. You think you can just cut us off and expect to walk away unscathed? She spat. You think the business world will look at you the same? You'll find that you've made a powerful enemy. I can destroy everything you've worked for. You're nothing without us. The words hung in the air, but I didn't flinch. Eleanor Walker was trying to break me, trying to scare me into submission, but I wouldn't give her that power. Not anymore. I'm done being afraid, I replied, my voice calm but firm. I won't let you control me, and I won't let you destroy what I've built. If you think you can tear me down, go ahead and try. But know this, Eleanor, I will never live under your control again. I've walked away from your family, and I have no regrets. For a long moment, Eleanor said nothing. The silence between us was thick, charged with the weight of the confrontation. She stared at me, her expression hardening, but I could see the faintest trace of disbelief in her eyes. She had underestimated me. She thought I would break. She thought I would bend. But I wasn't the same woman who had first stepped into her world. I wasn't the woman who had let her family's power intimidate me. I was Isabella, the woman who had built something of her own. A woman who wouldn't let anyone take that away from her. Eleanor stood up, the tension between us palpable. You'll regret this, Isabella. You're making a mistake that could cost you everything. I stood as well, my feet planted firmly on the ground. I wasn't backing down. Maybe, I said, but I would rather risk everything than live under your thumb. I'll find my own way, and I'll do it without you, without your family. With those final words, I turned and walked away from the meeting, from the world that had once promised me everything, but had been willing to take it all in exchange for my dignity. The meeting with Eleanor had been a turning point, not just in my professional life, but in my personal journey. I walked out of that office not just with the satisfaction of severing ties with the Walkers, but with the freedom I had longed for. I had finally reclaimed control over my life, my choices, and my company. The days that followed were filled with both uncertainty and determination. There were moments when I questioned myself, when the weight of the decision to cut ties with Walker Industries made me wonder if I had done the right thing. After all, losing a major client like Walker Industries was no small matter. The financial strain was palpable, and my team felt the pressure. But deep down, I knew I had made the right decision. I had chosen my integrity over profit, my self-worth over control, and freedom over fear. What happened next, however, was nothing short of incredible. With the Walker contract behind us, I turned my focus entirely on rebuilding. I reached out to potential partners, people and companies who shared the same values I held dear: integrity, innovation, and collaboration. I wasn't just looking for clients. I was looking for partners who would grow with me, not control me. The first breakthrough came when I met with Meridian Global, a rising tech company that had been looking for a reliable software solutions provider. They were impressed by our work and our commitment to ethical business practices, and after a few weeks of negotiation, we signed a long-term contract. It was a relief and a moment of pride, but it didn't stop there. I pushed forward, relentlessly pursuing new opportunities. I met with Frost Technologies, another potential partner, and after presenting our new products and capabilities, they too decided to join forces with Tech Solutions. Within a few months, our portfolio of clients had expanded significantly, and our business began to thrive once more. But it wasn't just about the contracts or the revenue, it was about proving to myself that I could do this. I could build a company that wasn't dependent on anyone's wealth or family legacy. I could build a business that thrived on its own merits, a business where integrity was the foundation. The contracts with Meridian Global and Frost Technologies weren't just a financial lifeline. They represented something much bigger: growth. Tech Solutions was now not only back on track, but it was growing faster than ever. The revenue from these new contracts allowed us to hire more staff, expand our resources, and invest in cutting-edge technology that would take us to the next level. We were no longer a small player in the industry, we were making waves. The emotional toll of the previous months, the pressure, the uncertainty, slowly started to fade as the company gained momentum. The financial strain I had feared turned out to be temporary. What seemed like a setback became the catalyst for a stronger, more resilient business. Our focus was now on long-term sustainability, on building a future where we could continue to innovate, continue to lead, and continue to grow. But beyond the success of my company, something even more significant had happened. I had regained my sense of self-worth. The woman who walked out of that office after confronting Alina was not the same woman who had entered it. I wasn't just a business owner anymore. I was someone who knew her worth, someone who refused to let anyone define her or control her. I had taken back my dignity, my freedom, and my future. And as I looked out the window of my office, watching the sun rise over the city, I couldn't help but smile. This was just the beginning. I had faced the darkest moments of my journey, and yet I had emerged stronger, more determined, and more focused than ever before. The obstacles were still there, but now I saw them as stepping stones, challenges to overcome, not walls to keep me out. As Tech Solutions continued to grow, I knew that there would be more challenges ahead. There would always be obstacles to face, always new risks to take. But this time, I wasn't afraid. I was ready to lead my company into a bright future, ready to build it on my terms with the values that mattered most. The walkers and everything they represented were behind me now, and I was finally free. As I stood in the quiet of my office, looking at the growing success of Tech Solutions, I couldn't help but feel a profound sense of gratitude. Not just for the new contracts and the financial stability we were beginning to achieve, but for the deeper lesson that had emerged from the past few months. The lessons that had shaken me to my core and ultimately shaped the woman I had become. The past few months had been filled with turmoil, betrayal, difficult decisions, and moments of uncertainty. But the greatest revelation I had come to was something simple, yet powerful. True success doesn't come from sacrificing your dignity, your values, or your integrity. It doesn't come from bending to the will of others or accepting their standards as your own. Success comes from staying true to who you are, even when the world around you tries to break you down. When I first started my journey, I thought success meant building a company that was profitable, a company that could thrive in the world of business. But now, I saw that success was more than that. Real success was about building something with purpose, with integrity, and without compromising who you are at your core. The Walkers, Daniel's family, had tried to break me. They had tried to buy my compliance, to make me believe that success was about wealth, status, and power. And for a while, I let myself believe it. I thought that their approval, their recognition would mean something, would prove that I had made it. But now, looking back, I realized that all of that was an illusion. I had been tempted by their world, by the money, the influence, the promises of success. But what I had gained in the process wasn't worth what I had lost. I had nearly lost myself. I had almost given up my values, my dignity, and my independence for a chance to belong to a world that didn't truly value me for who I was. The true victory was in the choice I made to walk away. As the days passed, I began to understand that success wasn't about wealth or the validation of people who didn't care about me. It was about having the courage to stay true to my own principles, to stand up for what I believed in, even when it was the hardest thing to do. Success was about respecting myself, no matter the pressure, no matter the cost. It was about creating a future where I could be proud of the choices I made, where I could build a business that reflected my core values, integrity, fairness, and transparency. I looked at Tech Solutions, the company I had built from the ground up. It wasn't just a tech company anymore. It was a symbol of everything I stood for. Every success, every partnership, was a testament to the fact that I had achieved something on my own terms, without compromising my values or letting anyone else define my worth. In the end, the lessons I learned were invaluable. They weren't just about business, they were about life. About the importance of self-respect, of standing firm in your beliefs, and of refusing to allow others to dictate your path. I had been given a choice: to compromise who I was and live under someone else's rules, or to take the harder road, the road of integrity, the road where I was true to myself. And I chose the latter. As I stood there, watching Tech Solutions thrive, I knew that the challenges ahead would be difficult. The world of business wasn't easy, and the road would have its ups and downs. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I had learned that real success isn't about what you gain, it's about who you become along the way. And I was proud of the woman I had become. I had walked away from a life that would have trapped me, and in doing so, I had gained something far greater. Freedom, self-worth, and the unwavering knowledge that my success would always be built on my own terms. The weeks after I left Daniel were some of the most intense and transformative of my life. My decision to walk away from him, from his family, and from everything that had once seemed so promising had been painful, but ultimately, it had been the right one. It was the hardest thing I had ever done, but I knew I couldn't live under the shadow of his family's control. I had to choose myself. But for Daniel, everything had come crashing down after I walked away. The silence between us was deafening, and the weight of my absence seemed to press on him harder with each passing day. The life he had once known, the world he had always been a part of, suddenly felt meaningless without me in it. Daniel spent weeks in a state of deep reflection, grappling with the fallout of his actions and the reality of what he had lost. He came to the painful realization that he had betrayed the woman he loved, the one person who had supported him, who had stood by his side. He had been complicit in the very system that had tried to control me, and for the first time, he saw his family for what they truly were: manipulative, controlling, and toxic. He had been a willing participant, choosing to stay silent in the face of their demands and their cruelty. And in doing so, he had betrayed not just me, but everything I stood for. Months passed, and eventually Daniel reached out to me. The call came on a quiet afternoon when I was at my desk, reviewing contracts. His voice, when I picked up the phone, was a far cry from the confident, charismatic man I once knew. It was broken, tinged with regret, as though he had been carrying the weight of his mistakes for far too long. "Isabella," he began softly, "I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I need to say this. I've had time to think, time to see things clearly, and I realize now that I was wrong. I was wrong about everything, about my family, about you, and about the way I treated you. I let them control me, and in doing so, I betrayed you. The woman I loved." I felt a sharp pang in my chest, but it was quickly replaced by something else. Indifference. The hurt was still there, but it no longer held the same power over me. I listened as he continued, his words now filled with desperation. "I've tried to change, Isabella. I'm working on myself. I want to be different. I don't want to be the man I was. I want to be someone you can be proud of. I'm asking for a chance to prove that I can change." He was asking for forgiveness. He was asking for a second chance. But I wasn't the same woman who had once believed in him. When the call ended, I sat there for a long while, letting the silence settle around me. Daniel's apology was heartfelt, but it was too little, too late. The pain he had caused me, the manipulation I had endured, was no longer something I could ignore. His words couldn't undo the damage. They couldn't change the fact that he had been a part of a system that had tried to break me. I thought back to everything that had happened: the dowry, the control, the silent complicity in the face of his family's cruelty. It was all too much. Daniel had spent so long living under the shadow of his family's expectations, and while he was now realizing the truth, I understood that his desire to change was driven by his own regret, not by an understanding of who I was or what I needed. His regret wasn't enough to erase the betrayal. And then, I remembered something that had always been true. Changing for someone else is never the right reason to change. You have to change for yourself, for your own growth, not because someone else has walked away. I made my decision. I wouldn't go back. I couldn't. The woman I had become was no longer the one who needed Daniel to complete her, to give her validation. I had learned that true love wasn't about fixing someone else's broken pieces or waiting for them to realize their mistakes. True love was about respect, mutual growth, and individual autonomy. And Daniel had failed me in every way possible. I didn't owe him another chance. Not after the way he had treated me, not after the way he had let his family manipulate us both. His apology, no matter how sincere, didn't change the fact that he had been a part of something toxic. And I realized that I could never return to someone who had betrayed me, not just once, but repeatedly, by remaining silent when it mattered the most. The day I finally closed the door on Daniel was the day I truly understood the meaning of self-respect. I didn't need him to validate my worth. I didn't need him to apologize to move on. I had already moved on. I had already chosen myself. As for Daniel, his regret would remain his burden to bear. I had learned that the past couldn't be rewritten, and some mistakes could never be undone. His attempts at change were meaningful, but they didn't change the fact that I had to live with the consequences of his actions. I had my own life to live, my own path to walk, and I wasn't going to let anyone, least of all him, block my way. As I reflect on everything that has happened, from the moment I walked into Daniel's world to the point where I finally walked away, one truth becomes clearer than ever. True love is not defined by money or power. The love that I once thought I had with Daniel was never really about connection or mutual respect. It was about control, manipulation, and living up to an ideal that wasn't mine to begin with. For so long, I had been convinced that being a part of his world, gaining the approval of his family, would be the ultimate achievement. I had allowed myself to believe that success could only come with wealth, status, and external validation. But in the end, I learned that success, real success, is about much more than that. The most important lesson I learned through this journey was that love cannot be measured by financial gain or societal expectations. True love is built on trust, mutual respect, and shared values. It is about seeing each other for who you truly are, not as an asset to be bought or a means to an end. Love is meant to empower, not control. Daniel's family taught me one crucial thing. They saw love as something transactional, a way to ensure their legacy and wealth. But I saw the truth, and in the end, I realized that the greatest form of love is self-love. I didn't need to sacrifice my dignity, my values, or my future for someone else's idea of success. I could love myself and build my own future, one where I wasn't defined by anyone else's terms. I chose to walk away from everything that sought to undermine my worth. True success doesn't come from compromising who you are or who you want to be. It comes from standing firm in your values, never allowing anyone or anything to dictate your worth. The story of my journey wasn't easy, and there were times when I doubted my decision. Walking away from Daniel and his family meant facing unknown challenges. It meant going against the tide, facing the uncertainty of not knowing what the future held. But it was also the moment that I began to truly understand the power of courage. Sometimes, standing up for yourself and what you believe in requires immense strength. It requires the courage to walk away from a life you thought you wanted, to leave behind what was familiar, even when it feels like everything you've worked for might slip through your fingers. The path of least resistance isn't always the right one. When I walked away from Daniel and from Walker Industries, I was taking a stand not just for myself, but for everything I had worked so hard to achieve. I was choosing to protect my integrity, my freedom, and my dignity. And that decision, though difficult, was the most empowering choice I ever made. I realized that sometimes the most important battles we fight are not with others, but within ourselves. It's about standing tall when the world around you tries to bring you down, and having the courage to say, I won't compromise who I am for anything or anyone. This story isn't just about business, betrayal, or romantic love. It's about the power of self-respect, the strength to walk away from toxic situations, and the freedom to choose your own path. No amount of money, no status, no external validation will ever be worth sacrificing your values. And when you stand firm in your beliefs, true success follows. I've learned that true love and power come from within, and nothing external can ever define your worth unless you allow it. My decision to stand up for myself, to protect my company, and to refuse to let anyone control my future was the ultimate act of love, not just for myself, but for everything I believe in. It's not easy to walk away from what seems like the ideal life. But the lesson is clear. Never compromise who you are to fit into someone else's world. The life you deserve is the one you create by staying true to yourself, standing firm in your values, and having the courage to walk away from what no longer serves you.